Chapter 41. Knock hurried back through the city, racing against the fading light. She'd finally managed to get a seat on the last passenger boat of the day coming back to Chitana. Now her trip north would be delayed, and she'd spent too much of her money, and on top of all that, she'd left her passport at the border. She'd have a lot to overcome when she finally got back on the road, but for now she had to get to the Giant's Bridge. The border control agents had said that Ampai had died in a fire only hours after Knock's visit to the governor. It couldn't be a coincidence, especially not since the governor was using that fire as a reason to crack down on the people. A few days ago, Knock would have never believed that the governor would be capable of something like this. But now her entire world has shifted. Nothing she had been told about the governor or the law or even herself was true. She tapped the skin on her left wrist for the 100th time that day. She was still reeling from the shock of learning about her birth, but hearing about Ampai had shaken her out of it. A woman had died. What if more people died, or got hurt, or went to jail? The governor had said he was going to punish the people for standing against him. Knock had to get to the bridge and tell someone. The people had no idea they were walking straight into a trap. Luckily, the walkways in the city had thinned out. In fact, as Knock approached the Giant's Bridge, the canals and alleys were almost completely empty. It was eerie, but she didn't have time to wonder what was going on. She hurried to the bridge, which was also quiet. Usually, there would be tourists admiring the view and vendors selling umbrellas or cold drinks. But this evening, only a handful of people stood at the rails, silent and watchful, like animals before a storm. When she reached the bridge's midpoint, Knock halted. At the far west end, a man paced, cleaning his glasses on the hem of his shirt again and again. Everything that she'd planned evaporated at the sight of him. "Daddy!" she cried, dropping her staff and running to him. He looked at her, his eyes wild and confused. "Knock?" He caught her in his arms and pulled her into his chest. "Knock, what are you doing here?" Knock had been determined to run away from her family forever, but now that she was in her father's arms, she couldn't let go of him. "We have been worried sick about you," he said. He really did look ill. His clothes were mismatched and rumpled, and there were dark bags under his eyes. He held her out at arm's length. His glasses sat crooked on his nose, but he didn't bother to straighten them. "What's this? What happened to your face?" Knock touched the wound she'd gotten when the governor's guards threw her into the stable. "It's nothing, Daddy, just a scratch." He hugged her tight again, as if he'd worried she'd run off. "We heard you never showed up at the school in Tanaburi. We tracked you to your firefighting gym, but they said you packed up and left yesterday. Where in the world have you been?" "Oh, Daddy," Knock whispered, closing her eyes. "Sweetheart, you can tell me," he said, pushing the hair off her face. "Whatever it is, you can tell me." "I've made some mistakes," said Knock, her voice cracking as she peeled her left arm away from her chest. She pushed her sleeve up to show her father the tattoo that was now visible on the surface of her scarred wrist. "I guess we both have, huh?" Her father gasped and took her arm in his hands. He rubbed his fingers over the scars and across the tattoo. "But how?" "I went to see the governor." She pointed to the ink letters. "He did this with his powers." Knock's father's mouth distorted into a frown, and he looked over his shoulder at the west side with contempt. "How dare he?" he said through gritted teeth. "And did he tell you everything?" Knock nodded. "Yes, everything," she whispered. "I'm sorry." "Sorry?" Her father cupped her face in his hands. "Knock, what do you have to be sorry for?" Knock's tears pooled on her eyelids and ran down, soaking her father's fingers. I think I've messed everything up." Commissioner Sivapan pulled his daughter close and wrapped his arms around her. "Oh, sweetheart, you haven't messed up anything. You are perfect, so perfect. Do you know that? I remember when you were born. The moment I saw you, that was my first thought. She's perfect." "No, I'm not," said Knock, crying. "I tried to be, but I'm not." Her father held her by the shoulders. His own cheeks were wet with tears. "You are to me," he said firmly. "You're right, though. I have made mistakes. many mistakes, but you were never one of them. I realize now that my biggest mistake was keeping the truth from you." He looked down at the ground and let his breath out slowly. "Years ago, when I was a lawyer, I had an affair with a woman who worked in the coffee shop below my office. It was wrong, and I nearly destroyed our family by doing it." He raised his eyes quickly to Knox. "I'm sure you feel ashamed of me. You've every right to be, but you mustn't be ashamed of her. She was a good woman with a good heart." Knox shook her head. "She was a criminal, a robber." "She was struggling," said her father, "and she had no family to help her. She worked very hard, but it was never enough. One day a customer left his wallet at the shop, and she took it. I guess she was too proud to ask me for money." He tilted his head down and nudged his glasses with his shoulder, but they didn't straighten. "She was arrested and taken to Namwan. When I finally found out where they took her, I begged the governor to release her, but he refused. That's how you ended up being born there." "And she died," Knock whispered. Her father nodded sadly. "The governor allowed us to take you out on the condition that I take the job as warden. Of course I said yes. I would have done anything he asked if it meant I could keep you." He took Knock's hand in his and rubbed the scarred tattoo. "I never regretted that you were born. I only regret how I handled it. I never should have lied about who you were." "But you did it for Mother," said Knock, before correcting herself. "I mean, for your wife." "She is your mother, and she loves you more than you can understand." Her father closed his eyes a moment. "I hurt her very badly, but that was my fault, not yours. Somehow she found it in her heart to forgive me. When you were born, she wanted to adopt you right away. She has loved you like her own daughter ever since. Why, right now she has a search party out looking for you. She went to Tanaburi herself to try to find you. When she learned you weren't there, she was beside herself with worry. But our reputation, the family." Her father sighed and looked behind him at the orderly teak buildings of the west side. "Your mother is trying to do her best for her children. She is just trapped by the rules we live by. We all are." He tried straightening his spectacles once more before pulling them off in frustration and shoving them into his shirt pocket. Without the foggy glass screening them, his eyes looked bright, washed clear by his tears. "The rules are wrong, Knock. We never should have used them as an excuse not to do the right thing. We love you, and we're proud of you. That's all that matters." Knock sobbed. Her father hugged her tight to him, and she pressed her face into his shirt. He smelled like their kitchen, and her mother, and her siblings, and himself, all mixed together. She had the sudden strange wish that she could fall asleep right there, and he would pick her up the way he used to when she was little, and carry her home and tuck her into bed. Knock's cheek rolled against her father's chest pocket, scrunching the glasses. They both sniffled and laughed as he took them out and cleaned them on his now damp shirt. "These old things. I've got to get—" He stiffened as he put them on again. Knock followed his gaze and noticed how many more people had begun to crowd around them. "We have so much more to talk about, Knock, but now is not the time," her father said in a low voice. "I need you to go home for now and wait for me there. This is not a safe place for you." Suddenly, Knock remembered why she'd come back to Chitana. She wiped her face dry with her sleeve. "Daddy, I have to tell you something. There's going to be a march on the bridge tonight. It's going to be peaceful, but the governor wants to shut it down. He's going to try to arrest everyone." Her father leaned back, shocked. "How do you know that?" "Dad, you have to stop him. It isn't right." Her father shook his head. "Knock, the governor came to me not even an hour ago and asked me to change the laws so he could do exactly as you say." "And what did you do?" asked Knock, holding her breath. I didn't know what to do, honestly." He looked down at his sagging socks. "I'm not good at being the law commissioner, Knock. A good commissioner would have had a clear answer for him right away. I should have been able to quote from an important book or bring up some lesson from history, but for some reason, all of that flew right out of my head. The governor is so sure of himself. The more he talked to me about this march, about the law, the more confused I became. Oh, Dad. But I just couldn't do it. I knew that if I did what he wanted, I would never be able to hold my head up in front of my children. So I told him no. Knox squeezed his hands tightly in hers. You did the right thing. Maybe, but it doesn't matter. He fired me. What? Her father nodded, and some other commissioners too. I'm actually lucky not to be in jail myself. The governor is going to change the law anyway. He is losing his grip on the city, so he's squeezing his fist even tighter. That's why I want you to go home right now. Things are about to get very dangerous here. He pointed discreetly to the people standing around them. You see all of them? They're undercover police. I worry that the governor himself will come out with his personal guards. I don't know what he'll do. I'm afraid of him. Now Knock realized why the men and women on the bridge had looked so odd. All their clothes were the same, as if they'd pulled them out of the same costume trunk. Knock glimpsed the tip of a staff peeking from beneath the jacket of a man who stood close by. A soft, rhythmic drumming drifted toward them from the east. It grew louder, then louder still. After a moment, Knock realized what it was, the footsteps of hundreds of feet. The police on the bridge gathered like a shoal of fish and began shedding their plainclothes costumes. All right, things are starting, said her father. You must go home and... Knock, what are you doing? Stop! Knock broke through the line of police. She scooped up her staff and ran, her black hair swishing behind her, straight into the mass of marchers.